Um, Hello everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, this is Jasmine. Welcome everyone. Weekend speaker event hosted by Cambridge University Buddhist Society. We're very pleased to have everyone joining us across the world and in person here as well. So today's speaker is Dr. Nalin de Silva, and we are very, very pleased to have him to talk to us about Western science and the Buddhist Dhamma. So yeah, if Dr. De Silva, you're ready, you can start talk.
Good evening, Venerable Sir and friends. I thank the Cambridge Buddhist Society for inviting me to give this talk today. And today happens to be the Navam full moon day. And so in that sense, it's very significant. Navam full moon day is a significant day for the Buddhists all over the world. Okay, let's start the discussion or the talk. I'm going to talk to you on Western science and Buddha Dhamma. I don't want to use the word Buddhism because isms would lead to various other connotations, and so I'll stick to Buddha Dhamma when I talk of Buddha, what the Buddha has said. Now, we want to first start with knowledge. Now, in the Buddha Dhamma, if you are familiar with Paticcasamuppada, you would have heard something like avijja pacca sankara. Now that is the beginning of what I can say of the construction of knowledge. Now all knowledge, as far as Buddha Dhamma is concerned, is constructed. It's constructed due to avijja. Avijja is, well, you can translate avijja as ignorance, but that may not be the correct translation. But we'll stick to the word avijja and also sometimes avidya and also ignorance. These three words. So they not give the same meaning, but we'll say that they are very similar in a sense. Now, what avijja? Avijja is about ignorance or avidya of three things. That is anicca, dukkha, and anatta. They are familiar with the Buddhists are familiar with these things, anicca. They've heard of anicca, dukkha, and anatta. Now, what Paticcasamuppada says is that people construct knowledge due to ignorance. So what is constructed is whatever knowledge constructed is due to ignorance, avijja. Now let's start with the way we construct knowledge. Now we have the world in front of us, or as we think so. We think that there is a world outside us, independent of us, and we observe various things like objects, people. Then we also observe motion, people going from there to here to there to here, and also objects like marbles, buildings, books, tables, chairs, everything. Now we take them to be, well, of course, a table has to be constructed by somebody, by a carpenter. But whatever it is, you see that we think that they are in front of us, independent of us, and we are here to observe them and also study the properties of these objects. But what really happens is, even though I use the word real, well, it's more in a conventional sense. Okay, please remember that when I say really and real, I use them in a conventional sense because it's very difficult to say that there is a reality independent of us, independent of the observer. Now, let's say we take, now say we have a table here. So there is a table. Now, this table is supposed to be independent of me. Now, the point is we have concepts like a new table, then an old table, and finally we might say the table perishes. Now, there is some kind of change from new table to an old table, and then the old table vanishes, perishes. In the case of individual human beings also, we have the same pattern. A baby is born to the world, he or she grows up and then becomes a child, then an adult, and then maybe he becomes an old person and then dies. Now, if I ask you, is it the same person who lived from the babyhood to the adulthood? You would say yes, the same person lived. And if I ask you the question, was it the same table that we call the new table, then the old table, and what perished or vanished after some time? You would say yes. So this means that we, even though we consider we have studied change, we know something is changing, it's changing, but we find that, or we consider that there is something that is not changing beyond what has been observed. Now, sometimes we call it the soul. As far as an individual is concerned, various religions call it the soul of the person. The soul is there, is the appearance that is changing. That's that's the conventional understanding. There is a soul. Not that the Buddhists consider there is a soul, but various religions consider that there is a soul, and this soul is changing. This soul, the soul appears to change for any observer and for himself or herself as well. Well, we can say the same thing with the table or the chair. Even though we don't think of a soul of a table, but we find that, or we consider that there is some essence. I use the word essence for want a better word. There is some essence beyond this, beyond the observed, beyond what we observe. So there is some essence, what we can call the table. So when you say the table changes from new to old, what it means is that the essence remains there. The essence remains without changing, but the appearance of the essence changes. Now, these the problem that we come across when we construct knowledge. Now, the point is, if we had known anicca or even anicca dukkha anatta, if we had known of anicca and anatta, we wouldn't have considered a table or a chair or an individual or person which we cannot observe living beyond us, or beyond in the sense that living beyond our observations. So what really happens is that even though these things are changing, they are in a flux, as they say, they are in a flux. Even though they are changing, we don't understand or we don't observe the change as such, but we have this appearance which is changing, and we consider there is something essence, some essence or soul or whatever you call it, beyond us or which we cannot observe. Now, that is the first part of this avijja. Due to avijja, we consider there are objects. There are permanent objects There are permanent souls. There are permanent, what I say, the permanent essence, which is not changing, but the appearance is what we observe, and that is changed. Now, who constructed these objects? You might say the carpenter or whoever it is. But these concepts have been constructed by the individual or the human beings. Now, to gain knowledge, all these are sensory perceptible knowledge, what we observe with our senses. We observe with the five sense organs. And just because that we have five sense organs, it doesn't mean that we come to any sort of knowledge about what is observed. In order to gain some knowledge, we need the mind as well. Without the mind, simply with the five sense organs, we cannot know anything. Now consider a camera. A camera also receives, as they say, light rays. But camera is not aware or not conscious of anything outside the camera. Even though we consider when we see a tree or when we see an animal, the light rays that come to our eyes make some impression and we know that there is a dog or there is a table or there is a chair from which the light rays are coming, but the camera doesn't know. Now we gain this knowledge simply because we have something called a mind. It's the mind that is the most important thing, even though the five sense organs are there for us to gain knowledge. So let's start with that. We have what is known as the sensory perceptible world. And the sensory perceptible world is observed through the five sense organs and the mind. If you include the mind also as a sense organ, we might say six sense organs, or as we say in Buddha Dhamma, salayatana. Salayatana means six, ayatana, six sense organs, you might say. So let's say, so because of this salayatana, we observe something. But what is observed is something that we have created. We have created due to our ignorance of anicca and anatta and also dukkha. Now, anicca, dukkha, anatta is the main thing. We are ignorant of that. Because of that ignorance, we construct with our senses, with our five sense organs and the mind, these permanent objects. Right? Then, of course, now having observed these permanent objects or people, we find they are moving. The objects are decaying. People are moving from one place to another. People grew old. Now, so there is a change. Now, in order to explain this change, we construct a concept called time. Now, there is this time, the time is a concept. Time has been constructed by people in order to explain change of what they have taken as non-changing objects. We take non-changing objects. We start with non-changing objects, or we construct non-changing objects, and then find that they are changing in our conventional sense. Then, in order to explain why they are changing, we say, well, they are changing in time. So we want a concept time to construct or to explain or to understand, as we say, why people are changing. Actually, there is nothing to understand. They are changing. They are changing. We are trying to understand change simply because we have started with unchanging or non-changing objects and people. So that is the beginning. Then, of course, we have other nouns and verbs and various things like adjectives and verbs in order to describe this word. We call, we talk of big people, we talk of beautiful flowers, we talk of animals, who can run faster. Now, these things are other words, adverbs, adjectives we have constructed in order to explain all these observations. Now, when you come to understanding, you ask various questions: how it operates, or why it operates. These how and why questions are very important. Now, they say that in science, it's only the how questions that have been answered. They don't answer why questions, but I'm not quite sure that I'm not in agreement with that, because we don't know how to distinguish. Sometimes we don't know how to distinguish between how and why questions. We'll come to that later if we have time, finally. But now, for the time being, we ask these questions how. Now, for example, supposing that we know that somebody, let's say X has been wounded. Now, that's something that we have observed. Say we observe that our friend X has been wounded. Now we want to find out how he became wounded, how he got wounded, how. We might say we can ask him how he got wounded, or we can ask somebody who is known to him, a friend of him, and ask how X got wounded. He might say, well, X tried to jump over the fence and he fell and he got wounded. Okay, that's how. That's an answer to how question. That if we are trying to explain how X got wounded, these are the explanations that either you can observe. Sometimes you observe the X, the person X jumping over the fence and getting himself wounded. That you can observe, or you can ask a friend, or you can ask X himself and find out how he got wounded. So when we have observations, we try to explain how they, how these, what happened, or how this came about. For example, let's consider the famous example of apples. Apples falling down. We observe apples falling down, or any now you might say falling down. Now we ask the question: how do they fall down? You can ask questions and answer them. Now, in science also, Western science also, people ask questions and try to give explanations. That's all. There is nothing else, nothing more, nothing less. People ask questions, how questions, and sometimes why questions also. Ask how questions and try to give answers. Now, these answers are nothing but our constructions. Okay, now what did Newton say? How do apples fall to the ground? He said, because there is a gravitational force, or now we might say there is a gravitational field. There is a gravitational force acting on the coconut or the apple or whatever. And then Newton went on to formulate a law that gives this force between two objects, either the earth and the apple, or the earth and the moon, or any two objects in general. Now, I'm not going to write down the equation or give the exact definition, but we all know there is something, we are told that there is something called the gravitational force. Now, has anybody observed this? Has anybody observed a gravitational force? Has anybody observed gravitational field as such? No, it's only a construction. It's a construction to explain or to understand why apples fall to the ground, to the earth. Now that explanation that was given by Newton long time ago, maybe at Cambridge Trinity College, that explanation has stood for more than nearly 400 years now. But we all know that that explanation has limitations. You can't explain or understand how the planet Mercury moves around the sun with what is known as the perihelion advancing throughout the moon. Now, according to Newton, if you work out the equations and use the gravitation law, you will expect to get the answer as a fixed ellipse. That is, the planet Mercury or any other planet for that matter moves around the sun in a fixed ellipse. It's not really move around the sun, but it's, well, we don't want to go into detail, but strictly speaking, it's the center of mass between the planet and the sun. Just forget the details. You might say that the planet has to go around the sun in a fixed ellipse, but that doesn't go in a fixed ellipse. As it moves around the ellipse, the perihelion, that is the position which is closest to the sun, advances. It also moves. So that is not in accordance with Newton's law. So what I am trying to say is this: these constructions or theories or whatever that you call in Western science they are merely hypotheses or guesses that work. The guesses work. When the guesses work, we consider them as super theories. If the guess doesn't work, we just discard that. That's all. Now, in order to explain this, I'll go further and say the difference between Western science and other story makers. Those scientists are also story makers. They are nothing but story makers. The story makers in science, Western science, differ from the story makers in other fields simply because they are organized. They are organized, and also they try to explain what are known as general phenomena, generalized phenomena, not just individual, not case studies. Though there are many people who are involved with case studies, which is essential. I don't say that that's not necessary, but case studies are also essential. But it's not the case studies that these theories try to explain. It's all the case studies. Now, for this, I'll just introduce the concept of induction. Now, we know that, say, if we have a population of objects, right? Population of objects. It could be the population of people, it could be the population of trees, it could be anything else. Some population or set, you might say. That population could be finite, it could be infinite. It doesn't matter. No, we can't observe all the objects in the population. It's impossible. We can't observe all the apple trees in the world. All the apples in the world. It's impossible. So what we do is we consider the sample or samples, maybe some samples. And then from the samples, we observe certain properties. Say, say the trees. We observe the trees and find that the trees grow and they grow up and not they don't grow into the earth, they grow up. So things like this, properties we observe of the trees on certain population of the certain sample of the population or some samples of the population. Now, having studied the properties or having observed the properties of a sample or samples, then we say that's true for all the members of the population. That is called induction or generalization. Thanks. Induction is that. That is, you consider a sample of a population, and then from the observation of the population, you say that property is common to all the members of the population. That is induction. Now, what the scientists usually do, although that they don't practice this necessarily always, there is some kind of induction in all these theory making or in all this story making. Now you start with, as I said, these objects which are not supposed to change. Then you have this population of objects. Then you observe certain properties, and these are generalized. Now that is induction. Induction is that. Then also you have deduction in Western science and also in logic. Deduction is mainly associated with a man called Aristotle, who lived many years ago in Greece. Now, maybe it's not Aristotle who formulated all these things, but everything goes by his name. Now, Aristotle introduced a logic, which is now known as Aristotelian logic. And that logic is, I would say, well, I not that is my nomenclature, but it's generally called a two-valued, two-fold logic. And also it has a beginning in the sense that it has certain axioms, properties, from which we deduce certain statements, results, using what are known as rules of inference. Let me state that again, just to clarify it. You have a certain set of propositions. Now, these propositions are called axioms. For example, in geometry, you say, well, there are certain axioms. And one of the axioms is that the so-called parallel axiom. Parallel axiom means that given a straight line and a point not on the straight line, then you can draw one and only one straight line through that point parallel to the given line. That's called the parallel axiom in Euclidean geometry. That's an axiom. Now, using this axiom and also what are known as rules of inference. Now, what are rules of inference? Rules of inference are things like, say, if A equals B and B equals C, then A is equal to C. We are all familiar with that. If A is equal to B and B is equal to C, then A is equal to C. Now, how do you get this rule of inference? Is it God given? No. Has it been proved by somebody? If A equals B and B equals C, then A is equal to C? No, not proved. It's purely by induction. The rules of inference are constructed by inference, by induction. Say we consider, say, three people, A, B, and C. A is equal to B in height. B is equal to C in height. Then we know that A is equal to C in height. Now, that is something that we observe. If A is equal to B in height or weight or whatever, and B is equal to C in height or weight, then A is equal to C in height or weight, as the case may be. So we generalize. We by induction, we say for all these abstract objects. Abstract means instead of considering A, B, and C as people or individuals, we consider A as an abstract object, which we don't have to imagine with our mind. So we have A equal to B, B equal to C in abstract. Now, using that and this parallel axiom and also some other rules of inference, we can draw the conclusion that in the case of a triangle, the sum of the angles is 180 degrees or pi radians. In radians, pi radians or 180 degrees. Now, that's a deduction that we have obtained using rules of inference and also axiom and an axiom, parallel axiom. Now, of course, now we say that it's mathematically true. The sum of the angles of triangle is 180 degrees is a mathematically true statement. Okay. But what about the axiom? Is it true? How do you know that it's true? Has anybody deduced the axiom from any other set of axioms? No. So what in Aristotelian logic, you start with something, start with set of axioms which have not been deduced or observed. is a set of assumptions really. Then using rules of inference you obtain from by induction, you deduce certain things. That's all. That's okay. That's good for mathematics. But what about geometry as such? In geometry, okay, you say that 100, the sum of the angles is 180, but that's based on that particular axiom, parallel axiom. If that axiom is changed, what happens if that axiom is changed? If that axiom is changed, the sum of the angles or triangle becomes more than 180 degrees or even less than 180, depending on the axiom you choose. So these are what I mean that these are constructions from assumptions, from observation, from what are known as axioms, and then you deduce. So in Western knowledge, there are these uh, basic things. That is, you have this logic of Aristotle, twofold, two value. Twofold means, well, I'll explain that in briefly. That is, if you have a proposition A or proposition P, let's say proposition P, the proposition P can be either true or false. Then you have the negation of P. Two valued means that can have two values, either true or false. Twofold means you can have the proposition P and its negation non-P. What you say is that if P is true, P can be either true or false. Then non-P also can be either true or false. If P is true, then non-P is not true. If P is if P is non-true, then non-P is true. That's the logic that we use. Now, then also we consider that there is an outside of the outside world, independent of us. This is called objects and people and everything else, animals, all kind of things. And we first construct them as non-changing object, then we realize they are changing, then we construct the concept of time. So we go on constructing knowledge using all these assumptions. Now, how do you in Western science? There are other things also which I don't have time to extend, elaborate in this lecture. Now, there is one main thing I would like to explain, right? That is known as abduction in Western science. Now, people used to say from Hume onwards, even say Bacon was Bacon and Hume and all these physicists and rationalists throughout history. They used to say various things on science, and they said that it's science is empirical and rational and all those things. But then in the 18th century, late 18th century, American philosopher Charles Peirce, he said, no, what is happening in science is abduction. He introduced the word abduction. Abduction means that you have a population with certain properties, and you want to explain how the population has got these properties. Say, why? Example, why the apples, or not why? How the, I mean, there is not much of difference, but let's stick to the word how the apples fall. And of course, then there have been various guesses, various abductions. Abductions are guesses. In Charles Peirce's vocabulary, he said that these abductions are merely guesses. You guess certain things. You guess, and if that guess works, if the guess works, then you accept that as a theory or truth or whatever. Sometimes we may call these guesses hypothesis. Hypothesis. Then hypothesis tested. You can go on testing hypothesis. You can go on testing Newton's gravitation law as people continue living this earth. But the point is, they can be tested and verified, but within a limited framework. So let's say this again. In science, you have these populations with certain properties, and the properties have been inducted by the properties have been attributed to all the members of the population by induction. Then you try to explain them. In order to explain them, you construct guesses, and that's called abduction, construction of guesses. And most of these cases do not work. They don't work. Very few work. Now, if you go through the journals in Western science, there are thousands and thousands of papers published, journals, and thousands of ideas or guesses. But how many work finally? How many are retained? Just a few, only a few are retained, but people can go on guessing. So only those guesses that work are retained, and also that these guesses are not universal, even though Newton called his theory of gravitation universal, it's not universal. You cannot, it doesn't work. Even in the case of planets going around the sun, it doesn't work. It may work for apples falling down, but it doesn't work for Mercury or any other planet that goes around the sun. So these cases work within certain framework in a limited range. Okay, now that's about construction of knowledge. Now remember, all this knowledge constructed due to our avijja, ignorance of what? Ignorance of anicca, dukkha, anatta. If we had known anicca and anatta, that is changing. There is nothing. But you might translate that into English as not permanent. I'm not very happy with these English translations, but unfortunately, we speak with English, so we have to use these words. But anicca is not really not permanent. Anicca is the basic thing. Is non-permanence is the basic thing. From non-permanence, you get into permanent, and then in order to explain permanent, you construct a concept called time. Okay, now so you have these concepts due to avijja, and avijja is because of ignorance or whatever of anicca, dukkha, anatta. Then you have these populations, observations of populations. Then, in order to explain the properties of population, you construct theories or construct this. Now, how do you construct? Uh, uh, I don't know whether I'm reaching the limit as far as time is concerned. Uh, uh, okay, please let me know if I'm running out of time. Okay, now I have exceeded the time, maybe? No, not yet. Anyway. Sorry, I won't take more than 15 minutes from here almost, right?
You have
Right
enough time.
now,
You have enough time. You have enough time.
okay, right. Thank you. Thank
Please
you.
feel as much as you want.
Okay, let's go back to the population and the theories and the construction of knowledge. Now, how do you construct knowledge? You construct knowledge in a particular culture. I see many of you belonging to different cultures. Even though you are at Cambridge, you are under the Western culture. You are taught within the Western culture, but you come from various other cultures. As far as I can see from your face, I may be wrong, but that's also a guess, right? I'm also guessing. Now, now in Asian cultures, there are differences from the Western culture. Now, just give an example or some example. Now, when you construct knowledge, you have to come out with stories. All these are stories, as I said. Now, from where do you get the stories? You get the stories from your culture, no, from nowhere else. And if now, for example, um, let's say now the famous theory of Big Bang. Sometimes people may object to the use of the word theory of Big Bang, but as far as the universe is concerned, people say the universe started from a singularity. Of course, they are very careful to say that the universe doesn't reach the singularity, but it's very close to the singularity. If you ask the cosmologist, he will object to the word using say that the Big Bang started from a point of singularity, but it's very close to singularity. But it has a beginning. It's what I want to emphasize. The Big Bang has a beginning. Now, from where do the scientists or Western cosmologists get the concept of Big Bang or beginning? Nothing is. Say, I am also a cosmologist. I did some work on cosmology long time ago, more than 50 years ago. But now, from where do they get this concept of Big Bang beginning? It's nothing. They get from the Bible or the Western Christian culture. From nowhere else. From nowhere else. Western Christian culture may not have God in their vocabulary now. Somebody might say the God is dead. Even if the God is dead, what we find is that the God lives in a different, I might say, avatar. Probably you are well aware of the word avatar. Now, avatar has become an English word. God may be dead, but he lives as an avatar. Avatar in the sense that Big Bang has a beginning. You must have a beginning. Aristotelian logic has a beginning of axioms. Big Bang has an axiom. Big Bang has a beginning. You never, all these stories in Western science, logic, or whatever, they always start with the beginning. You cannot get rid of the beginning. These something that they get from their culture. Now, if I construct a model of a universe which is not, it doesn't have a beginning, but which has a cyclic nature. It goes round the cycle. It goes round the cycle. Do you think that it will be accepted by the Western culture? I doubt very much. I doubt very much. A cyclic universe based not on a beginning, but goes on. It expands, it contracts, then again expands, contracts, go on expanding and contracting forever without a beginning, without an end. That's not familiar to the Western culture and very unlikely that they will accept. So now what I'm trying to say is that even these concepts, even the concepts, the stories, the theories, so-called hypotheses, various things, they have a beginning and they have a base, and that base is the culture. So now as an Asian Buddhist, I have a different opinion of the whole thing. I have a different model of the universe, expanding and contracting. I can construct it. In fact, I have constructed it, but it's not accepted. It's not accepted. It's not accepted simply because it doesn't fit with the Western culture, which has a beginning, which always appears to a beginning. So anyway, so I dealt with the construction of knowledge and how knowledge is constructed, and they are true only in a conventional sense. All these scientific theories are true only in a conventional sense. Otherwise, they are false. Otherwise, they are false because they are going on constructing knowledge on the basis of non-changing permanent world that exists outside us. Now, in fact, what I mean is that they are trying to understand a reality. They are trying to understand a reality which is independent of the observer, that is there, independent of the observer, with their construction, with the theories and the stories. Now, this was given a proof about 25 to 30 years ago by groups of scientists who came out with experiments. Person called by Aspe and his friends, his colleagues, they came out with the experiments that showed that there is no local reality, in the sense that the local reality is not real. I'm not going to explain all these things that use with the quantum physics, entanglement of particles, etc., etc., etc. But what they showed is that the so-called local reality is not real, and that is something that you can observe. Is something that we can observe, and what they have shown is that there is no local reality independent of the observer. Independent of the observer. This what is most important thing. No local reality independent of the observer. In that sense, is the observer. Is we who create this world. Okay, now then I come to the last part of my discussion about Buddha Dhamma. All these are not entirely with Buddha Dhamma. That's what I can say. All these constructions of knowledge based on ignorance of Vicha, of Anicca, Dukkha, Anatta is not in accordance with Buddha Dhamma. Even though now I'm not going to say that we should discard all this knowledge. No, we can't discard knowledge, because to live in this world we need knowledge. But what I'm trying to emphasize is that we need knowledge, but we should know again in a conventional sense that they are only conventional truths. And we have, in that sense, in Buddha Dhamma, we are trying to even renunciate these conventional truths or knowledge. Only by renunciation of knowledge that we can end this cycle of samsara. Now we as Buddhists, we think that we are reborn again and again and again. That goes in a cycle. Again, it's what we call it samsara chakra. Chakra is cycle. Samsara is this journey, birth. So samsaric cycle or samsara chakra has to be broken somewhere. Now, how do we break that? How do we break the samsaric chakra or samsaric cycle? Now, we can break that by, the conventionally we say, we go in this circle, samsaric circle, because tanha. You all heard of tanha, craving in English, craving or tanha. We have craving for objects, craving for people, and we are sort of we love people, we love objects. There is some feeling towards. Now all these because of our ignorance of avijja of anicca, dukkha, anatta, we have been constructing knowledge, constructing objects which are really not real. Really not real. So now we have to break away from this samsaric cycle. Now, in order to break away, you have to get rid of tanha. Now, of course, you can do that using meditation, bhavana, or whatever it is. But mainly, it has to do with renunciation of tanha. Renunciation of tanha means renunciation of objects, renunciation of knowledge. So only by renunciation this conventional knowledge, conventional truth, you can end this cycle of birth, rebirth. And that's what Buddha, Buddha wanted. Say when he said, well, this is my last birth, he said that he has broken the cycle. So now I'm not trying to say that we should break away from Cambridge and go back to whatever place and say, well, to hell with knowledge or something like that. No, you have to live with this world. You have to live with this knowledge. You have to live in this world. But you have to live in order not to live. Not to live means not to live again. You have to live in order not. So in order not, in order to live, in order not to live, you have to renunciate knowledge. And so I thank you all for listening to me, and also the Cambridge Buddhist Society for giving me this opportunity to address you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. De Silva. And there are like so many interesting things that's come up in the talk, and I just wonder if anyone's got any questions. If you're joining online, feel free to type in the questions in the chat box. And if we've got any question from in-person participants, I've just allowed the chat function, and feel free to type in your questions. And if you guys got any questions, feel free to just speak up. Or I can start with one. I think the fact that you mentioned about how the Western linear thinking's kind of you've said that it's kind of the foundation of Western scientific discoveries and thinking. And I was just wondering, kind of on an ontological level, what do you think the biggest difference is between like a Buddhist way of understanding the world and the universe and the Western way of thinking? And I wonder if you think there are any ways in which Western scientific discoveries could kind of complement a Buddhist way of a more, I guess, an experiential way of understanding the world.
Now, the thing it is now, now, even though Western science is based on Western culture, Christian culture, there are certain individuals who have a feeling towards Asian cultures. And I would say, now I can give a number of examples. For example, now we'll take Einstein himself. Einstein himself was influenced by a person called Ernest Mach. I'm not sure the pronunciation, M-A-C-H, German, maybe Mach or Mach, I call him Mach, right? So now he was a Buddhist. He was a Buddhist living in Austria, and famous member the famous Vienna Circle. And he had close links with Buddhist in Sri Lanka. And in fact, he has exchanged letters with some Buddhist bhikkhus. Bhikkhus means, I mean, you might say priest, but they're not correct translations, whatever it is, Buddhist bhikkhus. And so he has questioned. Now I said that now we live in this world, say phenomenal world. So now anyway, we live in this sensory perceptual world, and in this sensory perceptual world, Newton had introduced the concept of some time ago, more than 300 years ago, concept of inertial frames. Now these inertial frames cannot be observed. Marx said, you should not explain observable phenomena in terms of non-observable concepts. So he objected to the word objected to the concept of inertial frames of reference because inertial frames of reference cannot be observed. So that influenced Einstein. And Einstein's general theory of relativity is merely to do away with so-called inertial frames of reference. So in Einstein drew away with he just threw away inertial frames of reference and he constructed, he did the construction. He constructed his general theory of relativity because he had this feeling for rejecting non-observable things. So he based on observable things, feeling for that based on Marx's initiative, and that he got this from Buddhist ideas. Then again, I can think of Bo, founding father of quantum physics. Now he had these concepts from his Chinese philosophy of yin yang, yin and yang. I don't have a symbol. Is that yin yang symbol? That yin is included in this yang, and yang is included in the yin. So they are not two separate things. Right? Yin is not separated from yang as such. Yin is in yang and yang is in yin. So that influenced Wu in order to explain this quantum physics. And his quantum physics is, well, I won't say that it's based on yin yang theory, but it was influenced by yin yang theory. So they have feeling. So there are these are the two main constructions of physics in the 20th century. General relativity and quantum physics. They are both general relativity and quantum physics have been influenced by Asian ideas, by ideas in Asian cultures. So in that sense, there is a feeling for Asian cultures, but that doesn't mean that all the scientists are aware of this. They are not aware. They don't have a feeling for these concepts and such. They start with the axioms. They start with the general theory of relativity, then they go on deducing certain things, and then try to find out whether they can be verified, whether they can test. So even though the beginnings of both quantum and general relativity are influenced or were influenced by Asian cultures or Asian, and also they had some feeling towards these Asian cultures. That's the very top people. But the intermediate people, I don't think have any feeling towards these concepts or these. You might say. I think your question is very important, and I'm sorry that we are running out of time. Okay, thank you for the question.
Yeah, no, I thought that's a fantastic answer. And I just wonder if anyone else has got any questions so I do not hijack. There's an interesting question that's come up in the audience, which asks, after death, what will happen to our consciousness if we attained Nibbana? Mahayana says that it will become a special status of consciousness called Buddha consciousness, and Theravada says it will be destroyed. So I wonder if you've got any thoughts on that.
Right. As I understand it, the question is what happens to our consciousness after we attain Nibbana, is it? That so okay, right. Now there is a misconception of this attaining Nibbana. We don't attain Nibbana as such. Nibbana is not a place or something that you can achieve. You are not, say, many Buddhists consider Nibbana as a place or as a kind of a heaven that you experience only let's say, no dukkha there, no dukkha, right? No sorrow, only happiness. No, there is nothing called Nibbana like that. there is no Nibbana as such. You don't attain or you don't achieve. Or, no, it's wrong to say that you attain Nibbana. What you do is you close this. There's this cycle of rebirth. You have to break that. Once you break that, there is nothing. There is nothing. So even the word consciousness is not a very good word, because even unconscious people have vijnana. Now, so if you consider Paticcasamuppada, start with avijja pacca sankara, then goes on namarupa pacca vijnana, salayatana, that I mentioned earlier, the six sense organs including the mind. Now that's a cycle. It's not only a cycle, they are all originated, or people say dependent origination. Now, it's not dependent origination, it's co-origination. They originate, they are together, they originate together. It's not that this follows that or this follows that. In fact, in Buddha Dhamma, sometimes you say Namarupa Pacca Vijnana, Vijnana Pacca Namarupa. You must have heard of this Namarupa Pacca Vijnana, Vijnana Pacca Namarupa. So, because this causes that causes this. It's not the linear thinking of Aristotle. It causes this, that causes that. It's neither what is known as anuloma pratiloma, no, even not that. This causes that causes this. In fact, what Paticcasamuppada says is that if this ceases, the other ceases. That's all. If this ceases, if this origin, if this there, then that is also there. If this ceases, that ceases. Now the point is this. Now, I don't want to use the word consciousness, but vijnana. There is vijnana, namarupa and vijnana. So all you have to do is to break this. Once you break that cycle, there is no more vijnana. No more vijnana. Vijnana has nothing to do with vijnana doesn't go anywhere else and live there forever. We Buddhists don't want to live forever, unlike in other cultures, right? Other cultures, they want to live in heaven or wherever for eternally. Eternally, they want to live. But we want not to live. That's why I said earlier that we live in order not to live. We live not to live. Whereas other people live to live longer, maybe to live eternally in the heaven. So once you break this cycle, there is no more vijnana. So if you want to use the word consciousness, there is no consciousness after that. That's all. That's all. And so anyway, I don't know whether I have explained it properly, but all I can say is that there is no vijnana after you break this cycle. And I do want to use the word attaining Nibbana also. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I thought that was a really good answer. And I just saw there some similar questions about asking. I'll just summarize some of the questions I saw that asking about if the mind is unreal, then how do we know that kind of the Dharma and Nibbana is true? As in, how do we know that those are true if the mind itself is kind of classified as unreal and or illusionary in Buddhism? And someone else also asked about what is Buddhism based on, like this understanding of the world and the universe.
Okay, now the last I understand, all these an illusion. I think I should have used the word illusion at the very beginning. Right? All these an illusion. As you say, is I use the word construction. Construction, or sometimes you may use the word Maya, illusion. Right? Illusion. And so now these sort of paradox. Now when you think linearly, you come across a problem. Now you have this illusion or cycle. Now we want to break this cycle. Now to break the cycle, how do you break the cycle? You break the cycle, you have to get rid of this illusion. Now to get rid of the illusion, you need some knowledge. Now these where Buddha Dhamma comes in. To produce, to give that knowledge to break this cycle, or to give the knowledge to get rid of knowledge. So these knowledge to get rid of knowledge. So now you might say, how do you know that it's true? I don't think it's true or not. Whether it were the word I use it, whether it works or not. If it works, well, it has worked for many people. That's some people at least. So if you get rid of your tanha, then you attain something, right? You break this neck. And in order to break the cycle, you have to get rid of knowledge. So it's a sort of paradox, I know. It's a sort of paradox, but which cannot be explained with linear thinking. That much I know. You cannot explain that because it's linear thinking that goes into paradoxes. Now, there are people who study paradoxes in philosophy, but what they don't understand is that paradoxes are mainly due to linear thinking with a beginning. In a cyclic world or cyclic thinking, you don't have paradoxes as such. It becomes a paradox when you consider linearly. But in cyclic world, in a cyclic thinking or cyclic, I use the word chintana. Cycle, chintana means way of thinking, you might say, very crude translation, right? In this cyclic chintana, it's not a paradox. So in order to uh, break this cycle, you have, in order to get rid of knowledge, you have to have some kind of knowledge. It's conventional truth. It's a conventional truth that is used in order to break away from conventional truth. So that sounds paradox in Aristotelian logic or linear thinking, but it's not a paradox in cyclic thinking because I repeat it. To get rid of knowledge, you need some knowledge, and using some conventional knowledge or super conventional truth, you get rid of all conventional truth, and that is, you might say, nibbana. It's not achieving or attaining nibbana. It's just a case of stopping this cycle or stopping rebirth. That's all I had to say. Okay, thank you very much. I'm not sure whether I understood the question properly. Okay, you do.
Yeah, I think that really did make sense to me. And Himanta wants to ask a question.
I would like to ask a practical question about this. Now, I get the feeling of the difference between the fundamentals of Western science and the cultures that we are used to. Now, this leads to two different problems for us, for me. So one thing is, I know by feeling that this science is not a truth. And as a result, people who believe that it is a truth can work easier than me on this. And the other one is, it is also difficult for us, as also you mentioned, to create stories in this knowledge system. So I would like to ask whether you have any advice for us who find stuck in two different worlds about how to uh, how to proceed with our jobs or studies, and also meanwhile do something different than what is there already in the Western science, something by contributing with our own culture and our own ways of thinking.
You might say that it's your karma. Just you're stuck with, or you're stuck in two worlds, two cultures. Well, I mean, no, I think I also had the same problem, right? When I came to England a long time ago. I knew that, I want to become a scientist, but I knew that straight away I couldn't become a scientist because uh, I was not in the same culture. But the point is that, I would like to say straight that now we live in this world. You live in England, you live in Cambridge or wherever. Now, in order to live in England, you have to you have to comply with certain rulings, certain shall I say, certain traditions, certain traditions and patterns in that culture. So if you are a scientist or an engineer or whoever it is, who are working scientist, then of course you have to work in that atmosphere, and you have to be associated with that culture, even though you may not be able to construct very highly theoretical, very highly advanced stories within that culture. You may not be able to. Very unlikely. I'm not saying that you will not, but very unlikely. But because your culture is different from the Western culture, and you work in a different culture, you work in one culture, but whereas you were brought up in a different culture. So you have to adapt to the culture you are living, whatever it is. But however you adapt, however much you adapt, you cannot achieve the successes of various, I would say, so the people at the very top. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. Not that it's impossible, but it's very difficult, I would say. But all that you can do is, if possible, you try to create something from your culture, uh, whether Sri Lankan or Chinese or Asian, Indian or whatever it is. Uh, because it's like this. Now, as I said earlier, Einstein was influenced by Ernest Mark. Mark was influenced by Buddha Dhamma from Sri Lanka. Bo was influenced by Chinese culture. Now they are the very top people. Now there are the very top people, the intermediate, and so on and so forth. You may become a very top person like Einstein or Bo by getting something from your culture and trying to construct something in Western science. That is not impossible. You can if you try, and also and if you're well versed in your culture, and also the culture you are living in, the both you have to be well versed in both cultures. Then you may be able to do something like something. Maybe you may be able to come out to something like general relativity or quantum theory. Now, as you can see, as it is, Western science is going down in one place. They are not going forward. In fact, there was a paper recently in Nature. I can't remember exactly uh, the date, about maybe 1 week or 2 weeks ago in the Nature, or New Scientist. I can't remember now whether it's Nature or New Scientist. That they have said that not many ideas are coming up now in Western science. say the ideas coming up are now about 50% of what it used to be sometime about 50 years ago, right? It's about 50% of what it used to be 50 years ago. So, I mean, there is a problem. There is a problem with Western science because with this, within their culture, within the Western culture, you cannot find important stories. You cannot construct important stories. So it may be an opportunity for people who have come to Western science, who are dealing with Western science, who are doing research in Western science, who have come from other cultures. And so these are good opportunity. These are good opportunity, I would say, because there is a dearth of ideas, there is a dearth of stories in Western culture. So it's for you, Himanta, it's for you. And you may be able to construct a story based on your culture. And in Western, construct a story in Western culture based on your culture. I think that's what you can do. Okay, right. Thank you. And
You're motivated.
wish you all the best.